The year is January 1994. President Bill Clinton is in office and forms the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments. As such, the President and then Ruth Faden of Johns Hopkins Permanent Institute of Bioethics are committed to announce an openness policy regarding this department and its clouded history. The formation of this committee will lead to the unprecedented release of over 1.6 million pages of classified records. These records, amongst other things, took the veil off a long-echoed conspiracy theory involving the United States government testing radioactive materials on its own citizens. This video will cover some key points regarding Eileen Welsome's book, The Plutonium Files. In 1945, American scientists were racing to develop the first atomic weapon. These weapons used unstable radioactive elements such as uranium and plutonium as their key component. Plutonium at the time was a new element being studied and tested on animals. Although in the beginning scientists did not have enough plutonium to experiment with, they did have radium, another radioactive element. It would be fallacious to assume scientists did not have an idea what radioactivity was, and at the very least its negative effects on the human body. This fact is most evident by a scientist involved named Rob Lee Evans. He published a report in 1943 with a picture of a young woman. This young lady was a dowel painter in the 1920s. If you haven't heard of this, feel free to Google the Radium Girls. In short, these were a group of female workers who painted watchtowers and ingested radium after using their mouths to give the radium paint-filled brushes a point. The young lady in Evans' report was found to have 1 microgram of radium in her body and developed an enormous tumor. It is important to note she was only one of many affected by the radium. At the very least, it seems these scientists knew a millionth of a gram could be potentially fatal to a human being. In addition to this, the universities of Berkeley, Chicago, and Rochester were all doing tests on animals involving radioactive elements. These animal studies led scientists to realize human beings were needed for more reliable data. It was decided that 18 patients would be injected with radioactive elements. No consent was required, and no patient was informed they were to be injected and or exposed to a potentially dangerous substance. Often doctors and scientists picked vulnerable people. This included but not limited to the mentally retarded, terminally ill, schizophrenics, pregnant women, children, and even fetuses. People from lower socioeconomic classes were also commonly chosen. When one of the doctors was asked why, he or she mentioned it was because they didn't ask questions. Eb Cade was the first to be injected. He was dosed unknowingly with 4.7 micrograms of plutonium on April 10, 1945, at the Army Hospital in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. He was involved in an auto accident, resulting in multiple broken bones in his leg. Instead of treating his broken bones, they were left as is by attending physicians for 20 days, as he was injected with plutonium. Dr. Heimer Friedel, the deputy medical director of Manhattan Engineer District, determined that Cade was a well-developed, well-nourished colored man. He was suitable for experimentation. After being injected with plutonium, Cade had bone samples and multiple teeth removed to track the radioactive element going through his body. Eventually, Cade escaped the hospital and left alone, and luckily survived until 1953, where he died of heart failure. Elmer Allen was from Italy, Texas, but had been hospitalized in San Francisco, California. He had been admitted into the hospital due to an injured knee. He was told his leg would have to be amputated. However, 3 days prior, he was unknowingly injected with plutonium. He was invited in for so-called metabolism tests, which involved 3 trips to Chicago and Rochester. Unknown to him, they were merely monitoring the effects of plutonium in his body. During this time, these same doctors discovered he had bone disease associated with the radioactive element injected in him. He was never informed of this condition. One of his good friends paraphrased Allen. He always said they put a germ cancer in his leg. They guinea pigged him. Allen, in other instances, insisted that he had doctors bussing in and out of his room, practicing to be doctors. For decades after, Allen struggled with seizures, joint pain, and eventually diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic. He died in 1991 at the age of 80, always believing he was a human guinea pig. In another instance, a group of boys attending a school for the mentally retarded in Massachusetts were chosen. They decided to give these young boys radioactive oatmeal. This happened under the guise of joining a science club. The boys ate radioactive oatmeal in exchange for trips to ball games, and were even given Mickey Mouse watches in exchange for their compliance. One of the more notorious cases was a study involving 820 pregnant women at a prenatal clinic at Nashville, Tennessee. They were given a radioactive iron cocktail when going for checkups. These women were told it was vitamins they were ingesting to aid in their pregnancy and belonged by and large to lower income families. Helen Hutchinson was one of the females who volunteered to take the radioactive cocktail. It did, however, come with the benefit of free medical care. Her husband landed on D-Day and helped liberate 2 concentration camps during the war. He was an American hero who served the country, survived absolute hell, yet returned to have his wife, an unborn child, suffer at the hands of his government. Helen was 20 years old. She had so much nausea and vomiting during pregnancy that she lost 15 pounds during her pregnancy. She went into the exam room and drank a cup given to her by a doctor. She was always urged to drink it all by the standing physician. This drink was sweet and fizzy. Miss Hutchinson developed a bizarre line of blisters going down her face. Her daughter was born with an immune disorder, suffers from skin cancers on places where her skin does not get exposed to sunlight. These women did not realize they were part of a dangerous human experiment until the 1990s. These tests were not limited to Americans. One poor boy was brought in from Australia looking for cancer treatment. In 1946, Simeon Saul, known as Simi, fell off a hammock on the other side of the globe in Australia. Due to the fall, his mother noticed a tender mass on the side of his leg. Sydney doctors determined it was a rare form of bone cancer. Doctors in Australia were not equipped to treat such a serious disease at the time. They recommended young Simi go to the United States for the care he needed. Flights to the United States were almost non-existent post-World War, so Simi's parents contacted the Red Cross out of desperation. They were able to secure him a spot on the next plane going out to California. Upon his arrival, Simi was separated from his mother. She was only allowed visits periodically. He was unknowingly injected with plutonium and discharged a month later. Simi took a boat back home to Australia. No follow-ups were ever conducted, and Simi passed 8 months later. It is impossible to determine all the long-standing effects these experiments had on its subjects. There are simply too many, and time has placed its forgetful veil on our subjects. We do, however, know amazing details and names due to the hard work of Miss Welsome. For example, the doses depended on how long the patients lived. The faster the patient died, the lower amounts of radioactive substance was administered. It is also worthwhile mentioning the longer the experiments went on, the more brutal they became. The less care was given about life, and the more dehumanized the victims became in the eyes of the administrators. For example, patients in Rochester were injected with 5 micrograms of plutonium, which was 5 times what a Manhattan Project doctor thought could be held in the body without doing harm. 2 of the Chicago patients were injected with 95 micrograms, which is 95 times the dose they knew was harmful. Documents were kept secret for 50 years because participating doctors feared lawsuits and the backlash that would surely ensue if patients were still alive. This 50-year buffer would hopefully allow enough time to pass for those involved to pass away. It is important to understand that these fellow humans were betrayed and brutalized by the very people who took a Hippocratic oath to help them. There was no limit as to who was experimented on, from your average American going to see a doctor for help, pregnant females, children, fetuses, foreigners, and even prisoners. This is a prime example of what was considered fringe and conspiracy. It proved to be more shocking than the allegations involved. One could only imagine how many times Elmer Allen was labeled crazy for realizing he was a human guinea pig. The constant mental battle of a mother who realized the vitamin cocktail made her nauseous. It could not conceive the possibility that a doctor would purposely hurt her and her unborn child. Imagine what Simi's mother must have felt when they separated her from her critically ill son. How long Ed Cade must have sat in his hospital room, waiting for the right time to leave such a desperate situation. It is impossible for me to cover all cases mentioned in this book. I encourage everyone to give it a read, in specific the multiple cases of prisoners being tested on during this time. It is dedicated to those who suffered from this indignation and for the family of those involved. When an advisory committee presented then President Clinton with the report, he issued an apology to everyone who had been used in these studies. There was also monetary compensation issued out. The first 18 subjects received an average of $400,000, minus legal fees. The Vanderbilt women received $10.3 million. The boys who were fed radioactive oatmeal got an average of $1.8 million. The short video was made to open our eyes as to what we are capable of, what has been done in the past, and most importantly, to try and not allow this to happen again. History has been shown to repeat. I wish you all my listeners the best, and we must remind ourselves that most of us are good people with good intentions at heart.